Hi, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Looking forward to hearing from folks in the chat. So my name is Sarah Fuller. I'm a research associate professor at UNC Chapel Hill in the Department of Public Policy and associated with the Education Policy Initiative at Carolina. And today I'm going to talk about a project that we've been working on. This is in an exploratory stage. So what I'm sharing now is not a lot of, effect estimates, but a lot of descriptives and kind of exploring a topic. And so I'll be excited to hear questions and comments in the chat at the end. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of a unique set of early college high schools that are located on four-year college campuses. So I'm going to talk about what an early college is overall, and then why focus on four-year early colleges specifically, talk about the characteristics of students who attend those schools, post-secondary outcomes of students who attend those schools, and then a little bit about what college transition actually looks like within these institutions, and then talk a little bit about future directions. So the early college intervention, early colleges are small schools of choice that are located on college campuses and partnering with colleges. And the students within these schools choose to apply. It's intended for high-performing students, but targeting first-generation college students and students at risk of dropping out of high school. And the idea is that students take a college preparatory curriculum starting very early in their high school career, and they move into college courses at the partner institution, often as early as sophomore year, and that with the goal of being able to graduate with 2 years of college credit or an associate's degree at the end of 4 or 5 years of high school. Many of these are 5-year programs. So that's early colleges overall, and they've been growing in multiple states, but growing a lot in North Carolina. But so specifically thinking about early colleges on four-year campuses, most early colleges, the bulk of early colleges are on the campuses of community colleges, but there is a subset that are on the campuses of four-year colleges. And this segment has been growing, particularly in North Carolina. And very few studies have looked at this particular set of schools separately from the whole group of early colleges. We've had some great lottery studies by folks at this conference who that look at the effects of early colleges overall, and some of those include early colleges that are on four-year campuses, but they don't focus specifically on that as sort of its own separate thing. So some previous research that Doug Lauen and I and colleagues have done, we've looked a little bit at comparing four-year located early colleges to two-year located early colleges on just a few outcomes. And those results have suggested that there are some very different outcomes in terms of college going at these two different types of schools. And this is particularly interesting because these schools disproportionately serve students of color, particularly Black students. So I'm going to talk now about sort of what the current landscape of early colleges looks like in North Carolina. So this is using data from 2019, the last year that we have a set of data that includes test scores. And so just looking at the characteristics of early colleges, there are currently 16 early college high schools in North Carolina that are partnered with four-year colleges in North Carolina. There are 12 different colleges, institutes of higher education here. So there are 4 that actually have 2 early colleges on their campus. 11 of these early colleges are partnered with various UNC system institutions across the state. 5 are partnered with independent colleges. And then out of that group of 16, half of them, 8 are partnered with HBCUs specifically. And they in 7 different school districts. So looking a little bit at school level characteristics. So there's a 16 four-year located early colleges. They're looking at 93 two-year located early colleges at the same time as a comparison, as well as looking at all statewide school, all other high schools statewide. And so in terms of students, there's a little over 2,000 students in 2019 were enrolled in these four-year located early colleges. They're small schools, similar in size to the two-year located early colleges, about 200 students across all grades, which is much smaller than the typical high school in North Carolina. Very few of them are rural. Almost all of them are located in urban areas, which is very different than two-year located early colleges, which are predominantly in rural areas. And it's different than the state as a whole, which has many schools in rural areas. And then this last characteristic we look at is whether or not they're serving 13th graders, defined as do they have any 13th graders in 2019. It's very typical for the two-year located early colleges to at least offer 13th grade, even if not all students necessarily stay for all 5 years. Some go ahead and graduate in 4 years, but it's pretty unusual for a four-year located early college to offer a 13th grade. These are typically four-year programs as compared to the two-year located early colleges. So then digging in a little bit into the characteristics of the students who actually attend these schools. So when you look at student race ethnicity, as I mentioned earlier, the students who attend four-year located early colleges are predominantly students of color. Only about 26% are white students. The largest group, 43%, are Black students. As I mentioned earlier, these early colleges are concentrated on HBCU campuses, and so many of those campuses enroll large numbers of Black students as well as some of the others. So this is pretty distinct from the two-year located early colleges and the state as a whole. It's a different mix of students. When you look at other student characteristics, as with all the early colleges, it trends a little bit more female than male. The percent of students who are economically disadvantaged is very similar to the state as a whole and to other early colleges. Like other early colleges, there are fewer exceptional students than statewide, and many of the students are academically and intellectually gifted. In fact, this is an even higher percent at the four-year located early colleges than the two-year located early colleges. And so then moving to look a little bit at student performance of the students who enroll in these schools. So I'm looking here at middle school performance and 8th grade test scores and 8th grade absences. So this is before they're actually entering these early colleges at 9th grade. So that gives us a sense of kind of what are they coming in with in terms of their academic preparation. And what we see is that students at these four-year located early colleges are very high performing. The test scores are in standard deviation units, so they're 70% of a standard deviation above the statewide mean for 8th graders, which is higher even than the two-year located early colleges, which themselves enroll a set of high-performing students. And when we look at absences, students who enroll in early colleges have fewer absences in middle school. So these are overall very high-performing, engaged students. So now I'm going to move on to looking a bit at post-secondary outcomes. So this data is a little bit different. So before I was looking at the characteristics of the early colleges now, this I'm going to go back a little bit so that we can look at student college enrollment and completion. So this data is population level data from across the state of North Carolina on all students who enrolled in grades 8 through 13 who are tracking over time longitudinally. There, within this data set, because this is older data, there are 9 four-year located early college high schools and 72-year located early high schools. So we have data from the 2004-05 school year to the 2014-15 academic years for high schoolers, and then for college, it extends to 2017. So we look at 7 cohorts of entering 9th graders. So we're considering them to be students who were enrolled in an early college if they enrolled there in 9th grade. And we consider a number of pre-treatment characteristics that help us control for differences in the students who enroll in the schools. And so those include the demographic characteristics, absences, suspensions, test scores in 8th grade, and the 8th grade school of enrollment. So the outcomes we're going to think about here are 2-year and 4-year college enrollment and graduation. We're going to look at this over time after a typical high school graduation date. So so to be clear, this is 2-year and 4-year college enrollment and graduation after high school. So, these students are typically taking college classes during high school, but we're going to be looking at, okay, well, what happens after they finish high school? So just looking descriptively here. So these are the statewide numbers. I'm starting with the 5th year after they start 9th grade. And so I'm defining it that way because we do have these 5-year programs. So students in a 5-year early college program may still be enrolled in the 5th year after 9th grade, as may some students who fail to graduate on time. And so as we look from moving from that 5th year to 10 years after starting 9th grade, what you see statewide is that enrollment's the highest at the beginning, and then it drops off over time gradually. This is 2-year college enrollment and graduation, and so it's about 25% of students statewide were enrolling in their 5th and 6th year, and then it's dropping off after that. So we see degrees, and so enrollment is in that specific year. Degrees are accumulating over time. So if they have a degree, they have it forever after that. So it starts off very low at 5 years after 9th grade, and by 10 years after 9th grade, still not very high, but it's up around 8%. So then if we add in and we look at the 2-year located early college high schools, you see with enrollment in 2-year college programs, they're enrolled at pretty similar rates. They're a little bit lower in that 5th year when some of them are still enrolled in high school. But then after that, the enrollment looks very similar to the state. However, there is this group of students who already got associate's degrees. So they have a 2-year degree coming out of high school here in this 5th year after high school. And then it goes up a little bit, but pretty much stays the same throughout. So then if we look at the 4-year located early college high schools, well, one thing that comes through clearly is that these numbers are much lower. So students who attended 4-year located early college high schools start at much lower rates of enrollment in 2-year colleges, closer to 10%. And very few of them get 2-year college degrees over the course of this time period. So turning to 4-year college enrollment, when we look statewide, about 30% of students are enrolling initially, stays fairly steady until the 8th year after high school, which would be on-time graduation from a 4-year college right out of high school, and then declines towards that 10-year mark. And then you see starting in the 7th year after high school, students starting to actually complete those 4-year degrees, an uptick at 8 years, and then, more growth to 9 years, a little bit more to 10th years. But so students mostly finishing in 4 or 5 years. So if we look at the 2-year early college students, their enrollment that first year, that 5th year, is lower, likely because some of them are still enrolled in high school. Then it goes up a bit and is higher than the statewide average, but then kind of follows the trajectory of the statewide average. In terms of actually completing degrees, we do see some of the students from the 2-year located early high schools, early college high schools, completing a little bit early, completing in just 3 years out of high school. But then as you move towards 10 years, it really narrows with the state average. These students at the traditional public schools are kind of catching up. Now we add in these 4-year located early college high schools. What we see is that the enrollment of students who attended these schools in 4-year colleges right out of high school is very high. 70% of students are enrolling in a 4-year college out of high school. And then it does decline gradually over time. But you also see the number of degrees from 4-year colleges rising. Very few are getting them in 2 years. The design of the program is to allow 2 years of credit during high school, but we're seeing very few students then go on and finish college in 2 years. But a good number do finish once you get to 3 years out of high school and then 4 years out of high school. And by 10 years after 9th grade, there's this big gap where students who attended 4-year located early college high schools are much more likely to have gotten a bachelor's degree. Almost 50% have completed a bachelor's degree, which is much higher than the statewide average or the 2-year located early college high schools. Well, so you might say, okay, but the two-year located early college high schools had this really high rate of associate's degree completions. And while 50% of the students who went to the four-year located early college high schools do complete a bachelor's degree, the other 50% don't, and almost none of them are completing an associate's degree. So if we're concerned about having any college degree, are we really seeing an improvement here? So to kind of answer that question, we looked at any college enrollment, any degree here. So when you look statewide, follows a similar pattern to the previous two graphs because there's a combination of those two graphs. And you see overall at that 10-year mark, about 30% of students have any degree. When you add in the two-year co-located early college high schools, the enrollment pattern looks similar, but you have this large group who received a degree early on, and it goes up a little bit, and the number who received any college degree is quite a bit higher for those two-year located early college high schools. And we know from our previous graph that that big bump is in additional two-year degrees. When we look at the four-year located early college high schools, we see the initial college enrollment is much higher than either of the other two groups. The number of degrees is a little bit higher than the two-year located and quite a bit higher than the state. And what we know from the previous two graphs is that these degrees are almost all bachelor's degrees. So you're seeing an increase in bachelor's degrees relative to the two-year located early college high schools, but you're also seeing an increase, a little bit higher rate of degrees overall. So it's not at the expense of getting an associate's degree. Now, of course, these students who attend these early college high schools overall, but particularly the four-year located campuses we saw earlier, are very high-performing students. So, you would predict that high-performing students would be more likely to complete college. However, these programs are also targeted at students who are first-generation college students. And we know that the students in the four-year located early colleges are disproportionately students of color. So it's a little hard to know exactly what we would expect from that specific population in terms of college going. So to try and estimate a little better, controlling for other factors, the increase in college enrollment and college degrees associated with these schools, we use a propensity score weighting approach, which we've used in our previous research and validated against a randomized controlled trial to generate propensity scores based on pretreatment characteristics. And then we create weights for all of our students to essentially weight our control students to match the characteristics of our early college high school students. Then we run a second stage linear, a second stage LPM model with the weights and controls for pretreatment characteristics. So this is a doubly robust model. So the advantage there is any remaining variation after the matching process is soaked up by the controls in the second stage model. And we run separate models for two-year located and four-year located early college high schools here so we can see the college enrollment and completion outcomes for both. And so looking here across those same years following ninth grade, so from the 5th year to the 10th year, what we see when we look at two-year enrollment compared to similar students is it's down for both the four-year located and the two-year located campuses, which makes some sense. We know from our earlier graphs that these students are predominantly either have already completed a two-year degree in the case of the two-year located or are enrolled in four-year colleges, the case of the four-year located. And so that difference tapers off, but if we remember our graphs, that's primarily because our traditional public school students are no longer enrolled in two-year programs as we get further out from high school. So when we look at two-year degree completion, what we see is that for our two-year located early college high schools, there's a strong positive effect, and that matches what the literature has found. When you look at the four-year located, there's actually a negative effect. So if we mix these two together and don't consider that these are two separate groups, we're actually underestimating the impact of the two-year located early college high schools on two-year degrees because we are mixing in this other group of schools where really they're not targeting students towards two-year degrees. And so there's a reduction in associate's degree completion. So then when we turn to four-year college enrollment, and we look at compared to similar students, there's a big increase in enrollment for students at four-year located early college high schools, around 17% percentage point increase in enrollment. In that fifth year, it's lower for the two-year located early college high schools, but remember that many of these students are still enrolled in high school at this time. When you move to the sixth year, you start to see, okay, those two-year located schools actually do have an uptick in the number of students who are enrolling in a four-year program. It's just a little bit later. And when you trace over time, that fades out as students are actually completing their programs. So when we look at four-year degree completion, nothing in the fifth year, not too surprising considering that they've just finished high school. But as we move to a sixth year, which is really just 2 years after high school, you start to see, hey, both of these sets of early colleges have a positive impact on four-year completion. And then as you move further out for those four-year located early college high schools, it gets even bigger. And then as we move to the eighth year and ninth year, we're seeing the impacts disappear for the two-year located early college high schools. And so what's happening is those students are finishing up earlier than their peers at traditional public high schools, but then those peers are catching up as they get 4 and then 5 years out of high school. That's not as true for our four-year located early college high schools. They're finishing earlier, so you see the biggest effects when you're looking at 7 and 8 years, but then these effects persist and are still quite large as we get as far as 10 years from ninth grade. So that would be 6 years after high school completion, where we still see a 12 percentage point advantage for students who attended a four-year located early college high school. So then I'm going to talk a little bit now about, so what's happening at these schools. From previous research, we know that students at both of these schools are completing a lot of college credits while they are in high school. So what is happening at these four-year programs that is resulting in such a big advantage for these students relative to students who are attending what in a lot of ways is a similar program at a two-year college campus? So one question you might have is, well, are students just staying at the college that they were at? It says, is this, path been smooth for them? And so they're just staying there. And so to some extent, that's true. You do see 23% stay in college at the college where they attended high school, if they attended an early college high school located at a four-year college campus. However, most of them are not. 65% go to a UNC system institution, which makes some sense. Many of these schools, 11 of them are at UNC system institutions. And because they are within the system, if they transfer from that UNC system institution to another UNC system institution, they can take all of their credits with them. And so there's some incentive there to stay in the UNC system. However, 10% are moving to private colleges within North Carolina. So it's not just students sort of staying and finishing up their four-year degree at the same college. It seems to be something that's really smoothing transition for students, even if they go on to a different college. So to sort of supplement this administrative data and get a better sense of what is going on at these schools that is so special and that is leading to these big increases in enrollment and completion of four-year degrees, we've started to have conversations with administrators at the four-year college located early college high schools. We're just getting into that process. So far we've had conversations with administrators at 2 of these schools, and we've asked them to describe what college transition looks like for their students and what it looks like for their students specifically to remain at the college where their high school is located. Are there special different admissions processes, et cetera, that would make it particularly easy for those students? We're planning to have additional conversations with more early college high school administrators. So what I'm sharing at this time may not generalize across all of them, but just to give kind of a taste of what this process looks like, at least some of these locations that might help us to understand what's going on that gets these high achieving students who many are first generation college students, many are students of color, to successfully enroll in and complete college. So at these early colleges, they begin taking college classes early in high school. That's true of most early colleges. By their senior year, they're taking most of their classes on the college campus. In both of the cases that we talked to so far, they receive specific support around how to be successful in college classes. So they're receiving very specific instruction and support about how to take a college class and how to be successful in that college classroom. They also have opportunities, because it is a small school, to develop close relationships with both high school and college faculty. And they have access to college support resources while they're in high school, including like the writing center, math centers, whatever support resources are also available for college students. They have access to those supports while they're working on these classes in high school as well. And so the administrators reflect that this provides an opportunity for students to become comfortable in the university setting and sort of be able to imagine themselves there in that setting and being successful. In terms of transitioning and as they're sort of reaching the end of high school, both of these schools had a college liaison who was at the high school and specifically interfaced with the college there and supported students with that interface. Students in both of these schools were also required to apply to college as part of their high school course requirements. So they had curriculum requirements that specifically required them to do things like create a resume, fill out applications, fill out financial aid forms, and they received support in doing these things. However, they followed the same application process as other students, even at the college where they're already located. So they're not automatically admitted or having some kind of different process. They're following the same application process, but the school is supporting them in filling out these applications. It is a requirement for them. And they also, in both cases, received a lot of support to determine what credits that they took during high school would transfer to the colleges they were interested in going to. So not just in general, but very specifically for the college that they were interested in, whether that was this college they already attended, another member of the UNC system, or some other college. Their high school would support them in determining how many college credits would transfer prior to them making their college decision. They also generally had good access to financial aid. There's a debt-free scholarship, which is available to early college students in the state, but also because they did tend to be very successful in their high school and had taken all of these college courses already. They're very successful at receiving financial aid when they applied to college, and had a lot of support for that process of determining logistically which college would work for them in terms of transfer credits, in terms of financial aid. So to summarize a little bit, because I threw a lot of graphs and figures at you, four-year located early college high schools are typically located in more urban areas. They serve a population of students who are more likely to be Black and less likely to be white than in other schools. Students at these schools are equally likely to be economically disadvantaged compared to other schools. But they're very high-performing students compared to other students statewide, and even to students at two-year located early college high schools. So this is a set of students who are more likely to be students of color, equally likely to be economically disadvantaged, generally targeting first generation college students, but they're very high performing students. So compared to other students, they're less likely to attend or graduate from a two-year college than other students, but they're much more likely to attend a four-year college to earn a four-year degree. And they're earning those degrees a little earlier than other students. So we've sort of begun in our conversations with these schools to identify some potential mechanisms that might help us to understand what's going on at these schools that leads to these high rates of success. Some of those possible mechanisms are support in taking college classes during high school, so support to be successful in their college classes, a requirement and support in applying for college and applying for financial aid, and then the availability of transfer credit. The administrators we talked to assured us that their students were almost always able to transfer courses. They aren't losing a lot of courses that they took during high school when they do this college transfer process. Almost all of those courses are going with them to their college. So there's certainly much more to learn about the transition process here, including what we can learn from this that might apply to other schools. And so that's one of the things we're going to continue working on. In terms of future directions, we're planning a new study to survey high school and college students who attended early college high schools, both 2-year and 4-year located early college high schools, to understand what their college aspirations, what the academic preparation and transition to college looks like for them, what kinds of barriers they encounter, both in applying to and enrolling in college, as well as in staying in college once they get there. We also plan to interview early college high school students as juniors and follow them over time so we can get a sense of what really happens along that pathway from being a high-performing high school student to many students not, in fact, completing a 4-year degree program. We also plan to collect additional data on what kinds of transition supports different early college high schools, including these 4-year located early college high schools, are providing to students, to have a greater understanding of what kinds of supports seem to be associated with students having the most success. And then we hope to, through this study, generate hypotheses about supports at early college high schools and at institutes of higher education that can help improve 4-year college degree receipt. And so this is all related to these 4-year campuses, because we know that there's this set of schools that are very successful in this area. And so understanding what is happening helps us to think about ways that that success can transfer to other schools, other early college high schools, and other schools more generally. We also plan to spend some more time looking at student subgroups within early college high schools, particularly the 4-year located early college high schools, to understand whether specific groups of students are benefiting more from particular types of programs. In particular, this interesting pattern of many Black students attending early college high schools on HBCU campuses and seeming to be very successful there. So those are some future directions. It looks like I've left plenty of time for questions and comments. So I hope people have thoughts about this. We're in an early stage here, so I very much appreciate any thoughts or insight folks would like to offer. Does anybody have any comments or questions? If you need to think about it and process and have comments or questions for me later, you're also always welcome to reach out and email me. I'd be happy to chat later with anyone. So I'm going to answer the question about my email address. My email address is sarah.fuller@unc.edu. I can put that in the chat. And Dr. Marvin Rondon says, at the long run, should we conclude that early colleges and universities are not resulting in more college graduates? So when you look at 2-year located early college high schools, in the shorter run, it looks like there are more bachelor's degree completions. But as you start getting further out, more like 6 years post high school graduation, that effect goes away as students who attended traditional public schools start to catch up. That's less true, at least as far out as we've been able to look so far, which is about 6 years after high school graduation. It looks like there's still a pretty sizable advantage, something around 10-ish percentage points increase in receiving four-year college degrees compared to students who are similar using propensity score weighting methods. Other comments and questions come to you later. My email address is in the chat. I'd be happy to have a conversation with anyone who's interested in this topic. So again, Dr. Rondon, well, in most rural areas, there isn't an option for a university located early college. And so in terms of whether it's better to enroll in a community college-based early college versus one based at a university, that probably depends on what the student is interested in doing. The early colleges located community college campuses are very successful in getting students to complete 2-year degrees. The ones at located universities are much more successful at getting students to complete 4-year degrees. So it's going to depend on that individual student's interest, but for a lot of students in rural areas, early college as a community college is definitely still a great opportunity. So the question is in urban areas where both early colleges and community colleges and universities. So, well, the data we have shows that the early colleges located at universities are more successful at getting students to complete a 4-year degree if that is their ultimate goal. If their goal is to complete an associate's degree, then the early college or community college would be more likely to lead to that. Many early colleges and community college also offer access to CTE courses that wouldn't be available at the universities. So it has a lot to do with what the student's individual interests are. But if the student is interested in going to a 4-year college, they're more likely to be successful at that at an early college located on a 4-year campus. there any other questions? We might end a tiny bit early. Thanks, Doug, for that. My co-author, Doug Lauen, is in the chat and says it depends on a student's interest and field. Largest returns to higher education come from graduate degrees, and then a student needs a bachelor's degree in order to be able to go on to a graduate degree. Thanks to everyone who attended the session and who has made comments or questions. I appreciate it. Dr. Rondon, our time horizon for these students doesn't really go long enough to look at graduate degrees. That's something we'll have to come back to with newer data. Great. Thanks again, everyone. I appreciate your feedback.